to the Royal Hall at the Royal College of Music in Stockholm. My name is Cecilia Rydinger-Ahlin. I'm the Vice Chancellor Principal here at the Royal College of Music. And today it's with great pride and our privilege to say warmest welcome to you, Miss Barbara Hannigan, and congratulations on yesterday's Rolf Schock Prize in the Art of Music. Thank you. We feel so honored you choose to spend your day after the prize ceremony here at the Royal College of Music and bringing your knowledge, experience, and also working together with singers, students, both from here and from the University of Opera here in Stockholm. Sometimes it's my sense that the music society can change within one person, and a person becoming a role model, not only being a famous singer, but also being a famous conductor, singing and conducting at the same time. And the way that you build concert programs, not in the old way. We have an overture, we have a solo concerto, and then we have a symphony after the interval. Because time runs. And the change in the music society of having you as a person building a concert program out of themes that makes it more interesting, both for the musicians who play and definitely for the audience to experience something new that we didn't know we wanted to have. So it's a real privilege to get the opportunity to listen to you now and your work together with the students. Good luck to everyone and warmest welcome. And I will hand over the microphone to the President of the Royal Music Academy in Sweden, Susanne Rydén. Please.
Thank you. Just a few words about the Royal Academy, Swedish Academy of Music, for those who don't know it. I think that many of you have met us through scholarships of various kinds, auditioning for a scholarship, and in many cases also the happy receiver of one, locally from the conservatories in Sweden, or officially through auditions for our various juries. And we are hosting many possibilities to support students and also to award musicians around the world with the prizes that we are honored to have within our institution. The institution, which was founded in order to make sure that there was a possibility for higher music education in this country in 1771. We don't only deal with that, but we are also happy to the best of our knowledge to try to be innovative and to support musical life of Sweden in general. And we are very happy with this collaboration here today with the Royal College of Music and the opportunity of presenting Barbara Hannigan here. So we had a wonderful celebration yesterday, and I think that this day will just continue to celebrate the art of music making in your footsteps. Thank you. And now another person who will tell you a little bit about Rolf Schock. Who was he? Fredrik Wetterqvist, our permanent secretary.
Who was Rolf Schock? Good question. He was born in France in 1933. German parents who could not move back to Germany. They escaped Nazi Germany and moved to California. Rolf was a bit odd character, perhaps, could not quite decide what he wanted to do. He tried at 2 universities in California to study logics and philosophy, and I think failed twice to get his dissertation passing, and then eventually actually moved to Sweden as a US citizen. And of course he passed at Uppsala University. He didn't get a job though. He wrote a couple of interesting books that I have escaped reading, and I probably wouldn't understand them anyway. Logics and philosophy. He went to Stockholm, studied a bit more at Stockholm University and also the Royal College of Technology, KTH. Still didn't get a job, and a bit of a bohemian character. Very regretfully, he died in an accident in 1986, only 53 years old. He was working on his car and it fell on top of him. Much to everyone's surprise, though, he left a rather hefty sum of money. He had already written a will, and in this will it was discovered that half of his estate would go to 4 major international prizes in logic and philosophy, mathematics, the visual arts, and music. And he had also decided that the 3 academies for science, fine arts, and music would be the ones to create the foundation on which I am a board member, the Rolf Schock Foundation, to award these prizes. So in 1993, the first prizes were given for the first time, and with approximately every 3 years. It has changed a little bit over the years. Among the recipients in music, there is Ann-Sofie von Otter, Professor Erik Erikson, Ingvar Lidholm, the Kronos Quartet, and which I find rather interesting, György Ligeti. And of course, there is an incredibly interesting lineage here from Ligeti, who wrote the great Macabre, the opera, which was premiered by soprano Britt-Marie Arun, who's with us here today. Most welcome, Britt-Marie. To Barbara Hannigan, who performs the same piece in an extraordinary way. I wish we had YouTube here, because there is a great clip, but you could all go home and watch it later of this. So without further ado, I will now finally hand over the microphone to Monica Danielsson, singer and soprano, our moderator today, the head of opera program at the University of Gothenburg, fantastic artist in her own right. And
I have my own microphone.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Okay. But it looks...
Yeah, it was a nice gesture.
And Barbara Hannigan, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, and lovely to see all of you here. And we will make sure that there will be plenty of time for all of you to ask questions. So we will have a nice talk with Barbara here. And there will also be people running around with microphones. So if you just wave, and we will try to see who is up for the next question. But as a little start, Barbara, I just wanted to ask you, when you are a young student, even if you're a singer or an instrumentalist, a lot of time you spend with thinking about your career, how to build a career, where to start, where to go, how will it end. And your career hasn't really been straightforward. You have taken different paths and changed some directions here and there. Could you tell us a little bit about your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I'm from a small village in Nova Scotia called Waverley, and it's funny because I'm working right now at the Paris Opera, and more people work at the Paris Opera than lived in my village in Waverley when I was growing up. And we lived at the end of a road that wasn't paved, dirt road on a lake, and we had a piano, like many families in the community, and a certain level of musicality in the family. Nobody was a prodigy, just musical. And at the end of the street was the school. And at the school, starting from my second year, so when I was 6 years old, we had an extraordinary music teacher. And it was her first job. She was very well trained. Both of her parents had studied at Juilliard. And she had also had a very high level of training. And here, in this little village in Nova Scotia, she had her first teaching position. And she instilled two things in us, which have stuck with me and I think with many of the kids from the school. One was joy in making music, and the other one was discipline. She was really tough, and she had a kind of concentration in her classes, which I found, even at the time, I found addictive. I'm just wondering, can we bring the house lights up? Because I like to see faces when I'm talking, and I see mostly shadows and just a few. So maybe somebody could take care of the house lights. Yeah, thank you. And anyway, so I started singing and taking piano lessons and becoming very involved in this. And at a certain point, when I was 17, it was time to go to the next level. So I moved to Toronto to finish high school, and I went to one of those fame high schools, and we really did dance and sing and put on musicals and stuff like that, also in the hallway. And at that point, I was about to give my graduation recital, and, you know, I sang stuff from musicals, and I think I sang Let the Bright Seraphim with the trumpet player, and I also sang the world premiere of a song cycle by a composer who had just graduated from the high school. So that was my first world premiere. So I was 17, so that was 30 years ago. And it was normal. I mean, for me it was normal because I came from a place where our music making was not sophisticated. I didn't even know who Mahler was. I had never heard a Bruckner symphony or Mahler. I mean, I'd heard some Beethoven and seen, you know, Horowitz play on Sesame Street, stuff like that. But what I did have was the ability to work hard and joy in music. So singing a world premiere for me was as normal as learning my first Mahler song or a Bach cantata. Everything was new, so I didn't have any prejudice. And then the path, I suppose, went through my Bachelor of Music, my Master's of Music, postgraduate programs, but I found myself working with composers a lot, premiering pieces a lot. Often, like at university, we had a faculty artist series, and the faculty were supposed to perform works by the composers, that were teaching the theory and harmony classes. But none of the faculty singing teachers wanted to sing contemporary music, so I, as a student, would perform on the faculty artist series when I was, 19 years old. And for me, it was normal. So it wasn't until later that I realized I was following a path that was different. I didn't learn my 10 opera roles and then go to opera school and get an agent and do those things. I was working in improvisation. I was working with dance companies. I was developing pieces with composers. I was singing 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 world premieres a year. I mean, now it's 85, so it's been a lot. And I hope that maybe when we get to the questions, what might be interesting for some of you is to realize that there is no one path. There is a path through commitment to what your heart wants to do and your passion. That's my path. And as soon as I veer from that path, as soon as I compromise too much, if I sing something that I don't really believe in, or if I compromise on a program, or I compromise too much on rehearsal for a program, I don't feel well anymore. So I try to stay true to the path so that my body feels good, because when my body feels good, my body can become the music. I don't know if I answered your question, but...
Definitely, thank you for it. Are there any questions at the moment? You have to wave a little bit.
Maybe
because
not
I
yet.
don't see so much.
Oh, there's a
There's a
question
question,
here
yes.
from Charlotte Hellekant. Hi, Lotte.
Hey, Barbara. I have had the great pleasure, my name is Charlotte Hellekant, and I've had the great pleasure to snuggle up with Barbara several times on stage.
On stage for money.
And hanging in what we call giant floss.
Yeah.
In wires, doing some pretty extraordinary stuff.
Yeah.
And you do extraordinary stuff on stage when you do opera.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested to hear, what do you think? How do you dream of opera's future? How can it look for it to be kind of what you have already generated and what you stand for and what we were hanging in the net for?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because we did this crazy production with Sasha Waltz of a world premiere by Toshio Hosokawa. We played sisters. And we started the opera from the top of the theater, wearing harnesses, climbing down this web made of black string. And Lotte, who's fearless with heights, she was very, very good at it. And I was always a little bit scared at the beginning. And then once I could grasp onto this web, I was more or less okay. But that's not what I envisioned when I was a kid, imagining what is opera. But for me, I think, you know, I was speaking about this earlier in an interview this morning, like, again, it's that personal truth of what are the parameters that I'm comfortable being in. I want to work with particular colleagues. That means directors, conductors, orchestras, companies, composers, fellow singers. And now I'm in a luxury position of, in a way, being able to have quite a bit of control of those parameters. And when you're a young singer, you don't have control. When you're a young singer, you are, I mean, I usually encourage younger singers to take almost every gig they can, because work leads to work, and to make the best of whatever engagements that they can get, because usually it will lead to something else. And hopefully, if it's not the perfect engagement at one time, it might start leading towards a path towards more satisfying collaborations. But I mean, I think there probably is a place for old-fashioned opera. There are companies. There's this famous company in Canada called Opera Atelier, where they do operas like, they're almost like reenactments with the corsets and the costumes like they used to be in the time of Rameau and Purcell and Mozart, and they really try to do those kinds of stagings. But I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in working with perhaps dancers or live video or singers who want to move and singers who want to act. And I think, I don't know, how many singers are here? Oh yeah, great. So one of the things that I think I learned on the way was when I first started doing opera, I thought the director was going to tell me what to do. Like, I thought I would get into rehearsal and the director would say, now you go here and you will feel this and you will make this gesture this time. I thought that's how it went, but that's quite rare. It's quite rare. What normally happens is that we have to come with our own ideas and ability to contribute. And you notice in the cast, like, sometimes you're lucky and everybody's like that. And sometimes you have either less experienced or less willing people within the cast. And they slow down the whole process because they're not willing to dare, or they don't know how. And so to develop in yourself as singers, like, every single bit of research you could possibly do coming into any production that you're in. You know, research, how does this director work? Research other productions of the director. Look at your fellow singers. Figure out who you might be able to really engage with. You know, I always check out all my colleagues before I do a show. Like, I'm doing this show in Paris right now with Bo Scovus. And I thought, oh, he's pretty strong. So we can do a lot of physical lifting and fighting, which we do on stage. And, you know, really coming as a real collaborator instead of someone that the story will be imposed upon. I think that's part of the way that we can really be participants and collaborators. And I think that goes for all the kinds of music making, like, you know, if you're in the orchestra and you're sitting at the back of the second violins and you're playing like this as opposed to playing like this, you're engaged versus you're waiting, you know, you're active or you're passive. And so I think it's the engagement and this kind of searching for colleagues that eventually you can find on your path that maybe helps change. And there's still going to be a place in opera for the old-fashioned stuff, and there will be audiences that want to see traditional things, and that's absolutely fine. And I think when we're as prepared and committed as engaged in the contemporary pieces and or contemporary stagings, we also attract the audiences that want to see that. You know, I brought this today, this little blue book with all these loose papers in it. This is my, it's like my little book of vocal wisdom. There's this wonderful book that every singer should have by Lamperti, and it's called Vocal Wisdom. And it's all these little aphorisms from Lamperti in the bel canto time, you know, about the voice and about breath control and closure and Passaggio and so on and so forth. And so I have all these loose papers, and I have this notebook that are from, I think this has been going at least 10 years. And it's interesting because they're from lessons with my teacher. This piece of paper is about Passaggio areas and elements not natural to the register. For example, bringing more anchor and chest into the high register and bringing more delicacy and head register into the lower part of the voice. And then I have a few lectures from my teacher, and I've got a piece of paper that's just notes about vibrato. And then I have another about, you know, tension in the right hand or relaxing different parts of the jaw. This one is talking about surrender in musicianship. And the other day I was in the house in Bretagne where I go to practice, and I took all of those pieces of paper and I taped them to the wall. And as I was warming up, I was just scanning the wall with all these notes and letting the words just come in without analyzing, just letting surrender, spin, anchor, all those words. And I was looking in this little book, and I found little notes like, I vocalize out of my love for singing. That's a good one. Or, this is a great one. Every singer realizes the importance of good onset, but remember the importance of a good release. It's like bookends, right? A good ending can help guarantee a good beginning to the next thing. And I mean spiritually, imagine, but also vocally. And so these are all notes. These are my little vocal wisdoms that I've picked up from colleagues and from my teacher and from productions. And I carry it around with me everywhere I go. Because when I'm warming up, and when you're on the road and you're young or old, and you're alone, and things are not working the way you want, or you've had a very distracting phone call that morning, and you want to warm up the voice, but everything is tight because you've had a little bit of a disturbance that day. And just taping all these things to the wall or looking in the little book and breathing through that as you warm up, it really helps center and bring back, why am I here in this studio warming up my voice? What am I doing? What is my present moment? So I'm a real notebook person. I know there's a lot of stuff on the internet now, which is kind of funny, about how writing things down actually is more good for the memory, because the actual act of writing from the head through the heart, through the arm to the tip of the finger, and the pen on paper in one place instead of everything functioning, that you remember things more, but I think you also incorporate them more. So it can get a bit messy, but I would encourage you all to make your notebooks with your own vocal wisdoms. Another question.
Yes, do we have any more questions? It's really hard to see.
Yes, there in the
Yes.
red shirt. Oh, yes. Okay. So I started with a singing teacher in Nova Scotia, and funnily enough, she had studied in Detmold in Germany, so she was following the Detmold technique, which is actual technique. Somebody's laughing. Yeah. But basically, she taught me to hum. He doesn't need the microphone anymore. And I'm talking now. And she taught me how to hum, which I think was the basis of my technique, is humming, really. Then I moved to Toronto, and I studied with a teacher named Mary Morrison. And she brought me from age 17 to 28. In between, I had a teacher in Holland who was maybe stronger for interpretation. And then finally, when I was in 28, I noticed that one of my best friends, Allison, her voice had changed somehow, and in a really good way. It was like this kind of ownership that she had about her singing. And I was like, what happened to you? You know, because we'd been working together for a few years. And she said, oh, I started working with this guy named Neil Seymour. And he lives in New York. He won't teach with an institution. He only teaches privately, and he travels all over the world. And so I thought, well, I should try studying with him. And it's always hard changing teachers when you're a singer, because you have this loyalty, and you're afraid. And some schools you can have 2 or 3 teachers. Another school you're only allowed to work with 1 person. And so it can be difficult. Anyway, I felt a bit guilty, but I went to have some lessons with him. And he was talking about breath and passaggio. And I'd never dealt with passaggio before. And for those who are not singers here, if you imagine the voice as an hourglass, the passaggio is literally the passage and of the voice, which is kind of the transition within the head voice to where the voice blooms at the top. And Lamperti, the guy that wrote Vocal Wisdom, he talked about a kind of squeezing or compression. Pavarotti talks about that too. Talks about squeezing, which is a scary word for singers. But there is a kind of, we do deal with compression. I mean, let's face it. We deal with opposing forces of respiration and expiration at the same time. But anyway, and so this guy was talking about passaggio, and he was also encouraging me to sing a bit bigger than I imagined that I was. I was a really good girl and a really good student as a singer, and he was trying to open up my instrument a bit, which was scary for me. And it was funny because like he was opening up the chest, like he just wanted me to stand more strong. And I was physically in good shape, but he was like opening, and he was working with very low breathing, like pelvic floor, like you do in yoga. And these are all things that I hadn't really understood. I didn't really understand what the diaphragm did. I thought you breathed with the diaphragm, but you don't. The diaphragm leans, but it doesn't do the breathing for you. So I had all these kind of ideas that then he got really specific with. And I think it was, for me, the perfect time to move to a teacher like that, and I hope all of you have or will find the teacher that really can be someone that can accompany you for a large part of the journey. And each teacher I had on each stage was right for me at that time. And so with this teacher, Neil, it's been, I don't know, like 20 years. And I see him when I can. I see him, sometimes I go to his summer master classes, and I'm there for like 3 days of boot camp. And sometimes I'll Skype with him, and I won't see him for 6 months. But I'm working on technique with him all the time. And we'll work on anything. We'll work on Boulez and Ligeti, and we'll work on Mozart, and we'll work on whatever I'm singing. And we apply exactly the same technique to everything I sing. So I'm doing the same technique all the time. I'm trying to keep the knife edge sharp. I'm trying to keep the vocal cords from getting thick. You know, I'm trying to allow them to stay thin. And I'm constantly working on the same things that ballerinas work on with their tendus every day. I'm doing the same thing with tongue, jaw, alignment, breath, drop, lean, flow, et cetera, every single day.
You also talked a bit yesterday in your speech about the importance of having a mentor that doesn't necessarily need to be your singing teacher. You talked about Reinbert de Leo, your friend and pianist, and the importance of having someone, even when you're a world-famous singer and travels all over, that you need that kind of support and someone to go back to and speak to.
Yeah, I spoke in the speech about two people, both of whom are now 80. One is Reinbert de Leo, who is this unbelievable pianist, composer, conductor. He's just this soul full of music. And he worked with Courtag and Messiaen and Ligeti and everybody. And for me, whenever I lose, I mean, he's I don't know if you know the word touchstone. You know, he's that person that brings you back to your center, even if you just think about them. And I think it's good to develop a talent for finding mentors, because you can find mentors, you know, anywhere. I mean, you can feel a connection with someone. They don't have to literally be teaching you. They don't even have to be aware that they're teaching you, but you can learn from them. And the other person I mentioned in this speech is this dancer named Rina Schenfeld, who's in this show I'm doing right now in Paris. And the opera is called Berenice, and it's really complex, very, very difficult. Tomorrow is the last performance. And it's been really hard, because I found it really hard to get inside the piece. And so I was looking for how can I look forward to coming to rehearsal every day? And one of the ways was Rina, because she plays my confidant in the opera, and she doesn't sing. She's just there to dance a little bit, move around, and say a few lines in Hebrew. She's 80. She can still do the splits. And she comes into rehearsal every day, stretching, focusing, more flexible than probably any of us in this room. She danced with Martha Graham. She was a founding member of Baksheva Dance Company. And at 80 years old, she's still creating, and she's still disciplined. And I know she gets up every morning and she starts her stretching. And that was like instant mentor, you know, just add water. And it was amazing because, you know, I thought, here I was in this production where I was struggling, and there was one person in the class that was just this beacon of light in the cast, who was the beacon of light every day. But it was also my talent that I recognized that I didn't get negative, and that I didn't think, I hate this show, it's too difficult, I don't understand the music. But really that I found something, and through the positivity of using Rina's light, it helped give light to everything else I was doing within that production.
Joy and music, as you mentioned in the beginning. Thoughts, questions?
Yeah.
So you will get a mic there, yes.
Oh, okay. You'll be next.
Okay, sorry.
Hi, I'm Carl. We met briefly yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm an opera singer and composer. I would like to ask you a little bit about health.
Oh,
so
good.
You were telling us some really fantastic things about vocal health, obviously, but also the overall health, which clearly is connected to the vocal health. But how do you manage to? I mean, do you obviously you do train? Do you dance? What are you doing? And how do you deal with the fact that you're meeting so many people with their colds on the airlines, all that stuff? That would be really interesting for, not the least, for young singers to hear about that.
It's really important because it's, you know, for a civilian, getting a cold is just getting a cold. For a singer, it's not 1 week. It's like the beginning, the middle, and the end, which seems to last forever, right? We all know this. Like, until you really have the right balance of fluidity again, these things, they can last for 3 weeks minimum, you know. So how to avoid? Well, number one, you know, washing your hands all the time. And I get on the airplane, and I have those little wipes, and I wipe the arms, and I wipe the thing. I mean, it's not obsessive. It's just careful, and half the stuff I sing, nobody else knows anyway, so it's not even an understudy. So it's the pressure. But, so how do we stay healthy with the voice? Our speaking voice is often less healthy than our singing voice. We take a lot of care to place the singing voice on the resonance and to understand how to support it and so on, and then we start talking like this right on the chords, especially when the day is over and we're tired and we're in a loud place. Like yesterday, we were just talking about it, we were at this dinner after the wonderful Rolf Schock ceremony, and then we went to this dinner, and the two of us, we were sitting across the table from each other. There's no way we could have talked to each other because we would have had to be like this, you know. And so this awareness of speaking and speaking in loud places, you know, before rehearsal, for example, or after rehearsal when you know you have to sing the next day. What to eat and when to eat. I think something like 40% of singers have reflux issues. That means the acid from the stomach coming up. That's partly because we use the diaphragm in a very athletic way. And so the little things that close, the sphincters that close in the stomach, sometimes they don't close properly, so acid comes up. And that's really, really bad for singers. It makes you hoarse, and it makes you you have less stamina. A lot of singers are taking esomeprazole and Nexium, and it gets worse with stress, so that's just great. And so we have to control our diet very carefully, and everything's different for each person. So I encourage you, you know, if you do have any reflux issues, or even if you don't, to be aware of what has an effect on your throat before you're singing, and how long before you sing should you eat. For me, like, I looked at sports websites and I figured, okay, if I've got to do like a marathon opera like Lulu, then how am I going to plan my eating? So I usually have a big meal, a fairly big meal with like, and they're always really boring, like steamed chicken breast with some broccoli and hummus, for example, 3 hours before the show. And then I have bananas and apples in my dressing room for the intermissions, you know, for example, but really carefully planned. And vocal fatigue. So 6 hours a day, opera rehearsal. How are you going to deal with that? Not really want to sing 6 hours a day, right? So how do you mark? Do we actually learn how to mark? Marking means half singing. And sometimes what's clever to know is if you're doing a 6 hour a day rehearsal and you know your part is demanding, to go to the conductor or whoever is running the rehearsal that day and saying, if I don't sing full out all day, when would you like me to sing? It's like giving children a choice between, would you like this vegetable or that vegetable, right? So it's psychologically a very good way, instead of saying, I don't want to sing, it's using the positive, saying, when would you like me to sing full? And then they have the choice, so that you know and you can plan, you know, when you're going to be full on and when you're going to be marking. And a little note for the singers about marking is that marking doesn't mean half body, it just means half the sound. So the rest of you has to be fully engaged. Visualization, also a very big health issue, because if you can learn to visualize like a gymnast would visualize a tumbling routine, or a diver would visualize a dive, that you can learn to visualize the difficult passages of your music, or visualize how you're going to approach this note, so you're not just trying and trying and trying and not doing so well, but you're actually visualizing exactly how am I going to do this. You go through it, and it takes patience, really, because we want to just do it, you know. But sometimes just to visualize, how is this going to go? Or visualize in your memorization. You don't need to use your voice to memorize, and you don't need to use your voice to learn music. You can learn an entire opera without having sung one note of it. You can learn in the studio with methods of writing things down, playing it on the piano, walking it, thinking it, any manner of not using the voice, so that when you do sing it, you know where you're going. Yeah? It's like imagine a gymnast doing a tumbling routine and not knowing what the next move would be. They would fall down. So we can do the same thing with our voice. Did I miss anything about vocal health? Oh yeah, training your body, yeah, exercise, right. And especially nowadays, I mean, not just me and Lotte climbing down a net, but wearing harnesses, but also in general, most opera directors nowadays expect you to be able to move and sing at the same time. They expect you to be physical. They often, I mean, Charlotte had to lift me, but they expect you to be able to contribute physically. And I find cardio, a combination of cardio and resistance weight training is very good. But I encourage you, if you ever want to do weight training, to work with a personal trainer who is aware of what you do, that you're a singer. Because I generally, when I'm working with, I love weights, I love toning, you know, but I always go one level lower of what I can actually pull or lift or whatever it is. I go one level lower because I don't want to put any stress here. And I say 60% or 70% cardio and 30% weights, because the cardio is where you really need it. If you can get your heartbeat in a really, that when it's under stress and beating fast, that it can come back to normal quickly, and that comes with cardio training. It will help you enormously in stressful situations and in performances. You know, sometimes when I was singing Lulu or other pieces, I really had to run around, and then all of a sudden you have to stop and sing long lines. And the thing I'm doing in Paris right now, same thing, Bo Scovis and I, there's this one section in the piece, it's crazy difficult. And I said to the director, Klaus, you know, I love moving on stage, but I really think this section is asking for park and bark. That means just stand in one place and sing it. And he goes, oh, I had the idea we'd stage it like a La 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 Human Steps duet. And La 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 Human Steps is this incredible theatrical dance company. I was like, what? And so Bo and I went home that night and I Googled La 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 Human Steps and I looked up their routines, and I thought, okay, I can do this, this, and this. I can't do that, I can do this and this. And I went back to rehearsal the next day with an offering. Instead of making him tell me what to do, I offered. And we came up with something possible, and at a certain point, Bo, at the end of this crazy, crazy violent fight duet, it's like capoeira, except with really, really difficult, complex music at the same time. At some point, Bo and I are holding hands and extending, and then we let go and we fall on the floor. And we're just on the floor going, and 4 seconds later, I have to hold a high A for like 6 seconds, pianissimo. And I'm like, seriously? But the cardio training has helped a lot to deal with things like that. So physical health, physical training of the body. It's not a matter of being thin or something like that. It's a matter of having a certain tonus in the body and a certain strength. Yeah.
We had a question parked up there, I think. Do you have a microphone?
Yeah.
Hello. I wonder, how and when did your path take you into conducting, and has that changed how you now work with other conductors?
Yeah. So the conducting started, it wasn't that I thought, I want to be a conductor, I'm going to change my life. It was more that there was one opportunity to conduct an event at the Châtelet in 2011. And someone in Paris that ran this series, this festival, and he wasn't the only one, but he was the most convincing, said, Barbara, you really need to try conducting. And so I prepared for that event, and it was Le Renard by Stravinsky, which was for 4 male singers and a chamber orchestra. And it was also this same guy's idea that I should sing and conduct the Ligeti, Mysteries of the Macabre, at the same time. It was his idea. I didn't come up with it. And it was a really good idea because the piece is about someone who controls and needs to control, which is part of being a conductor. And so I prepared for that debut. I didn't prepare for the next years, and that was in 2011. But after, well, one thing, the feeling before I went on stage for that event was very emotional. And even if I talk about it, I still feel that feeling. It was like, it's like an opening different than opening for singing, but it was like an opening and a feeling of care and responsibility that was different than being a singer. Different than when I was just caring for my role in a piece. But as a conductor, it was a different feeling, and I was very moved by it, and I clocked it. So after this debut at Châtelet, then there were some offers immediately to make some programs where I would both sing and conduct. I thought, yeah, what could I both sing and conduct? Well, maybe this Mozart piece and maybe this. And eventually I started doing other pieces, larger pieces as just conductor. And I realized that this was an important part of my life. And now it's almost 50%. And as far as how has it changed my relationship to other conductors, it has. I'm more appreciative of the ones, and most of the ones I work with are super prepared, and I'm really more appreciative and understanding of what the conductor's job is. And I notice that, singers, we can get really sensitive when we're criticized. I remember when I was younger, and I was like, that conductor hates me. And now I realize he didn't hate me. He didn't have any particular feelings towards me. He was just really busy, and he didn't like that I kept coming in it with a tone that he didn't like or at the wrong time or something. But it wasn't personal, not at all. But singers, we tend to take things personally. And especially what I realized as a conductor is that you have so many things to think of, so many things to organize in preparation, before, during, after the rehearsal, that sometimes you don't have time to be nice and to use the best words and to think of what would be the best word to deal with this person at this time. And like someone like, for example, Kent Nagano, who I really enjoy working with, Kent and I were talking at one point, and he said, singers really don't like me. And I thought, I was like, yeah, they don't. Like, we were doing Lulu. But part of it was because Kent doesn't, he's very direct. And this is something I really liked. He's super direct. He doesn't take time to analyze this person and think how would they best be dealt with. He just, but part of the problem is for singers is that we're so open and sensitive, everything goes right here. So somebody says something, your feelings get hurt, you take it personally, it goes right here. And then you don't sing well the next time, like the next phrase, literally. And I had this a lot when I was a young singer. And I noticed, as soon as I started conducting, I had much more compassion for conductors. Really. I really had a lot more. I didn't care if they were rude or nice, it didn't bother me anymore. I really, and I think I can also tell a conductor what I need from them. You know, what kind of cue I need from them, if I need a double, or if I need them to subdivide the bar, or if I prefer they don't subdivide the bar, or if they give an extra lift before, or if they give me 2 bars before, if it's a really complex piece. I can tell them what I want in conductor speak. And I mark my score like a conductor. And so we're dealing with a similar language. You know, singers, often we work with coaches. Now, I think the purpose of a coach is to have someone playing the piano part or the orchestral part of what we're singing, and to work on some interpretive things that we can't hear, maybe ourselves, or to guide us in a certain way. But sometimes singers work with coaches to learn their music. Like, to learn their music. I'm like, no, that should be our responsibility. Because when we pass over to another person the responsibility of learning music, I mean, I don't think a violinist would go to a coach and get the coach to teach them what was the next note and keep banging it out on the piano till they got it right. So we need to be at that level of musicianship as well. Also, so that we don't get our feelings so hurt in rehearsals, because we're all on the same level, you know. I diverged a little bit, but I think I answered your question. Yeah. Oh, and one other thing is responsibility as far as, like, sometimes conductors would say to me, "Oh, you're so easy to follow." And I asked one of them, what did he mean exactly? He said, "You show me exactly where you breathe." I thought, I didn't do anything, I didn't move. And he said, "No, you just give this little indication when you're about to breathe. It's almost like a cue, so that we could always land together." And that awareness, like that he told me that he needed that, and that he liked that. I thought, oh, like what a relief to have that dialogue, you know, between the singer and the conductor, instead of just, you know. And so finding, also for us to find, like I said about which part of the rehearsal would you like me to sing, you know, finding psychological ways of encouraging the conductor to breathe with you, or that you need a little more time here. But again, using nonviolent language. There's a really good book, I think it's Marshall Rosenberg, called Nonviolent Communication. It's kind of for dealing with terrorists and robbers, but it's great for music rehearsals and conductors, because you learn how to speak in a positive way that is non-accusatory, you know. So I'd recommend that book on anybody's reading list.
We have another question there, I think, yes?
Yes, I wondered at what point do you consider that you know a piece, like good enough that you're prepared well enough to say, "No, I can come to the rehearsal"?
Well...
Do you have a checklist or something? Like?
No, I mean, like, you know, in opera rehearsals it says in your contract that you have to show up with it memorized. And, I mean, even with Lulu, you know, when you do a piece for the first time, you're going to get thrown, you know. You can't be perfect in the rehearsal. And I think one thing that's great to learn is stumbling and continuing. So if you can get through it, right, or if you're doing a world premiere, if you can get through a scene, if you have anchoring points within a big section of music, that's very helpful. And I will answer your question, but since I'm in this trajectory of thought right now, finding out from the director if they're going to work in order, okay, of the piece, and how fast. Like Katie Mitchell, she pushes through the entire opera in a week. The first time I sang Melisande, she wanted to stage the whole opera in the first week. Well, I was having a heart attack because everybody else in the cast knew the piece. They'd all sung Peleas and Melisande many, many times, and I was the newbie. And it was very scary for me, and I had to go to her and say, "I'm not ready to do Act 5 on Friday. Like, I'm just not, it's too fast for me." And so she gave me a delay of execution until after the weekend. But having an idea of how that process is going to be so that you can plan what you've prepared. I have little pieces of paper that I usually have on stage with me that I fold up and put in my bra. Cheat sheets, but it's like a shorthand of the opera. Not notes, it's usually words and some rhythms. I mean, I suppose I never feel 100% ready, even with pieces I know really well. And maybe it's a gift that I get scared and I'm constantly checking and rechecking. Like, I never think, "Oh, I know that." The piece that I'm singing next week, I've done it many, many times, and I'm taking quite a bit of time to revisit it and rework it and rememorize everything. And with an opera that I'm singing, normally I'll go through the opera all for the entire piece before every performance. Even if I sang it the night before, I'll still go through it. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older and I don't trust my memory as much. And you know, with singers, we have a physical memory of the shape of a word in our mouth, but we sometimes forget what the word is. We only remember how it feels. I think we've all been through that, when we just know that it sounds like awe, but we can't remember what the word is anymore. So, I find, again, writing things out helps to register things in my memory. And for any opera, but especially contemporary pieces, I will write the whole thing out in a notebook with symbols of the bars and the rhythms and shapes, like basically making graphic scores of the opera over and over and over again. And at the beginning, it's very, very detailed when I'm first memorizing. And then as I go on, I become less and less detailed until I'm almost just writing a line because I know what this is, I know what this is. So that's a confirmation to me that I'm getting close. And I also find memorizing from different directions is really helpful. So you can visualize it, you can play it from memory on the piano, play your line from memory on the piano without singing. You can sing it, you can walk it, you can draw it. Sometimes like like in the Abrahamson piece, it goes from 7/4 to 5/4 to 7/4 to 5/4. So sometimes I'll like walk the time signature and sing on top of the time signature. Sometimes I'll conduct myself, but sometimes I like the walking because you actually feel the syncopation literally in the body. I guess that's eurythmics, isn't it, in a way? Question here? Did I study conducting? Well, actually, I never tell this part of the story, but when I was in university, we had a really good choir conductor, and she wanted me to study choir conducting. And at that time, that's what women did. They conducted choirs. And so I took her course, but I was so scared to stand in front of my fellow singers and conduct that I did it once, and I couldn't do it again. I don't know. And it was the fact that they were singers. It was really weird. I was 18 or something. And then, but I had no aspirations to be a conductor. I wanted to sing. And so then when I made the debut, no, I didn't study before the debut. I went to a conductor friend of mine for an afternoon, and he taught me how to mark up a score like a conductor and how to organize, which I still do, just sectional phrasing, big picture, smaller pictures, etc. And then after that, I was doing Facade, which is by William Walton. It's a really funny piece. And I was doing it with Simon Rattle. And so Simon and I were trading off. It's for 7 instruments. And so, and there's 2 speakers, right, and instruments. And so when I was speaking, Simon would conduct the instruments, and then he would be speaking, and I would conduct the instruments, and him, and he would conduct me. And after that, the next morning, I was at the airport, and I called him to say thanks. That was really fun. And he said, you should really take some lessons. But he meant, like it would be good for you because you're probably going to do this for a while. And so he called up Jorma Panala, who also won the Rolf Schock Prize. And he called up Jorma and said, this is the introduction, and I think it would be a good idea that she went and had some lessons with you. And so then I called up Jorma. Jorma's a man of few words. He's like, yes, come. And so I went to Finland, and I love going to Finland anyway. And so I went, and I had private lessons with Jorma with a pianist. And we were working on Stravinsky and whatever I was preparing for my programs, Mozart, Stravinsky, Ligeti, whatever. And it was very helpful. And the deal was, Simon said, let Jorma teach you some technique and discipline, and then I'll work with you after that. And so I worked with Jorma for a couple of years, and I really enjoyed those lessons with him. And I even got to sing Mahler 4 with him, which was really nice, because he's such a beautiful conductor. And not very many people get to see him conduct, but it's very beautiful what he does himself. It's noble and elegant. Anyway, and then I was taking lessons with Simon and with David Zinman. And they're really different, because David and I would just sit side by side and study scores and talk through it, like almost sing through it, and sometimes go back, but really almost no gesture. And with Simon, he would just sit back there, and I'd work with the pianist like I did with Jorma. And Simon said, if you do that, nobody can follow you. How can anybody tell what you do? And so, and then you learn, but in a way, the biggest way, I think, and the only way you really learn how to conduct is in front of the orchestra. And every orchestra is different. You know, I've gone from one orchestra to another orchestra, like back-to-back, same programs, and it's just like night and day. Because they have their own feeling of rhythm, speed, movement. You know, you have to really, they're like a big animal, and you have to learn how to ride that animal, you know, like riding a huge horse, and to figure out how they respond and how quickly they respond and so on. Yes. Reactions? Oh, do people resist? I break down their resistance. The question, sorry, was that do I have reactions? Do people, to the way that I conduct, or is negative reactions or yeah. I don't think so. I mean, most of the places I go, I mean, people already know me as a musician, and they already have a certain trust. And I think what I'm doing is very authentic to me. And I think an orchestra senses if you are authentic or not. That's what they feel. And I remember when I was in Rome with Santa Cecilia, and I was really nervous to go to an Italian orchestra because I thought, oh my God, those Italian macho guys, they're going to be really sexist and they weren't. They were like embracing, and it was very familial to conduct that orchestra, and it was a surprise to me. And one of the things I learned during the rehearsals was that this particular orchestra, and in fact every orchestra, like, there's no point doing something just technical. Let's just do this technical thing. No. Always with the heart and the full engagement of everything at all times. And that's also how I sing. I never do something just technically, because it doesn't exist. So I'm always, and I applied that, the same thing to conducting, that even if we're just rehearsing one section, that everything is in all the time, everything is there. And the orchestra responds to that. And of course, clarity of gesture, whatever. I mean, and you know, I had another orchestra I was working with, and the concertmaster, he was difficult. It was interesting, because I'd been with that orchestra several times with a different concertmaster. And then this particular guy, I could see there was something that was bothering him and relating to me. And I thought, and I could see that there was like separation between him and the orchestra, which is often the case between a concertmaster and the orchestra. And I thought, I don't want to win this battle. I don't want it to be me and them against him. I want us to be together. And I took enormous amounts of energy to bring him on side. And by the end, he was on side, and it was wonderful. And this, so I mean, there may be, I think every conductor has a certain resistance. There's always somebody in the orchestra who's, for whatever reason, there's something that they're uncomfortable about. And you can choose to fixate on it, and you can choose not to, and there are moments when maybe you should say something, but most of the time, you should leave them and let them find their way, you know? Because otherwise you're engaging in, again, what can be potentially a conflict, which doesn't need to be brought up. Usually problems work themselves out.
I thought about, as we also spoke a bit about yesterday, that your new project, that you felt now that you're in a place in your career where you're starting to really want to give something back to new singers and young singers. So I thought it would be interesting to hear a little bit about this fantastic mentoring, international mentoring project, Equilibrium, if you want to tell us a little bit.
Equilibrium. So Equilibrium, actually the very first day of Equilibrium was here in Stockholm, at the opera school where I had the auditions for the first day. So Equilibrium is this mentoring initiative I started because I could. And it was, I thought, now that I'm conducting and I can make my own programs and I can hire my own soloists, I'd rather not hire well-known singers that already have plenty of work. I'd rather help younger singers in the first substantial phases of their professional careers. I don't have time to teach. I don't really want to have any kind of full-time teaching position. What I wanted to do was keep performing and bring younger colleagues into my realm. And so I created this, like, way too fast and without any money. Thank you, Rolf Schock. And I set up a website and applications, and 350 singers applied from 39 countries. And I had this idea to do the Rake's Progress, and I got Gothenburg Symphony on board and Munich Philharmonic, and the next thing I knew, it was like we had a European tour, and La Monet was involved, and then a couple of Mozart requiems, and then the Pulcinella complete, you know, all these crazy things. And it had to be organized within a year. And so anyway, and so wherever I was going, I organized auditions. I'd stay a day after the gig. And so when I was here conducting the orchestra, I stayed an extra day. And we had auditions at the opera school. And I did this in Zurich. And I did this in London for 2 days and in Paris for 2 days. And I heard 125 singers live. And the singers had, in their application, they had to send some videos and their CV and a personal letter. By the way, one singer wrote her personal letter by hand and took a picture of it and sent it in. Everybody else typed. And I tell you, the effect of that handwritten letter was heavy. Be aware that YouTube exists and that you may be on it, because when I asked singers to send me a video, the ones that I was interested in, I would Google them and find a whole bunch of other videos of them on YouTube, often singing the same piece at different times, looking for consistencies or inconsistencies in their technique. So be aware as young singers of what you've put out there, because once it's out there, it's very hard to take off. Anyway, and so I chose 125, then I heard those people, and I chose 20 singers and 4 conductors. One of whom is here today, Sophie Asplund. And Sophie, it was really, I'm going to talk about your audition, because it was really interesting, because Sophie came in to the audition, and this was for the Rake's Progress, so all the sopranos had to sing Anne Truelove's aria. And most of the sopranos were dressed pretty well exactly the same. They had like this dress to the knee, slim, dress to the knee, sleeveless or cap sleeve, girlish. And I thought I saw Sophie wearing that same dress as everybody else, in walking around, more or less, same dress. And she'd also come, but she'd said she wasn't feeling well, and so she wasn't sure if she was going to sing or not. And I said, well, wait till the end of the day, you know, because you might feel better at the end of the day, and you can sing last. And then Sophie came into the audition, but she wasn't wearing that dress that I thought I'd seen her in. She was wearing almost pajamas. She was wearing these long trousers and a comfy sweater. And I was like, weren't you wearing something different before? And she said, yeah, but I just wanted to be comfortable. And I was like, cool. And then she sang. And I could tell that she had a cold, but I could also tell that I wanted to work with her. And remember, this was the first day of auditions, so I still had 125 people to go through. And at the auditions, I didn't just let people come in, sing their 2 pieces, and say hello, thank you, goodbye. After each 5 or 6 people had sung, I brought them back as a group, those 5 or 6 people, before I would hear the next 5 or 6, and I heard like 25 a day. But anyway, I'd bring 5 or 6 back in, those 5 or 6, in a circle, and we would have like a mini talk, like a mentoring session, like what we're doing now. And we would have a dialogue. So that they, you know, when you go to a birthday party when you're a little kid and you go home with what's called a loot bag, you know, you get all your little treats. It was like that you left the audition with a loot bag of maybe some advice that would help you, and certainly making that audition a more positive experience, that you're recognized as a human being and not just another person that has a good high C or not. And so that's how I organized the auditions. And as the project went on, I mean, very quickly, we got all these orchestras on board, and I realized it had become a kind of movement. And I work with an Olympic coach named Jackie Reardon. I've worked with her for 10 years on focus and discipline. So I asked her to come on board. I have a yoga coach who's also a musician who's on board. I have different colleagues coming in and speaking. And so we actually start in Gothenburg in a month. But funny thing was, Sophie said to me that during the talk, I think she said to me that what was important for her was to sing more outside of Sweden. So I kept that in mind. If we hadn't had that talk, I wouldn't have known that. And I kept that in mind, so I didn't put her in the Gothenburg cast. I put her in the cast with Munich Philharmonic, so that she's going to be seen with Munich Philharmonic. So for her, it's great, and the tour, and the European tour. Oh, it's so exciting. Anyway, but we start November 21st with a 10-day retreat in Paris. And then we will go to Gothenburg and have our rehearsals. And this retreat involves, deep score study and analysis and work and so on. But it also involves a kind of, let's say, focusing in on the core. Nobody's allowed NAs, no mobile phones, and writing things down in notebooks. And Jackie Reardon, the Olympic coach, is going to be there with her eagle eyes watching us all the time, because she's looking at energy from a very kind of top sport kind of perspective. And so we're going into this season, and there are projects now planned for all of the coming years. And I suppose I like the idea of mentoring for professionals, because I didn't want to start another training program or education program. I didn't want anybody to still be in school. I wanted them to be in that first substantial phase of the career, which is really hard in any field. I mean, also for doctors, also for lawyers. All of a sudden you're a professional. What does that mean? And you're alone. And you're supposed to be good, and you're supposed to be professional, but you don't really know what that means. And so all the things that get thrown at you, yesterday I said in the speech, the psychological impact of public criticism on the internet, in the newspapers, the loneliness, the traveling, how to deal with being sick when you're on the road, how to deal with a difficult colleague, how to deal with a conductor who you just cannot follow, all these kinds of things. And so now it exists, and it's funny because it was Lisa Larsson that was there yesterday, and we were chatting. She said, it's like there's a point when you reach a certain age when you realize you want to share what you know. And I reached that, and it was like a very clear feeling. And so you just created equilibrium.
Howdy. Regarding young singers and education, I would very much like to hear a little bit your viewpoint on what a singer actually needs to know. I mean, in your particular case, you're such an excellent singer and conductor. I guess that behind those capacities, there are lots of training in music in many more ways than just those few conducting lessons. And singing lessons, I guess that you have a lot of training in harmony and piano, I guess.
Yeah.
Could you give some advice to the young singers?
Yeah, I think piano skills are pretty important for singers. And the thing is singers often come very late. Like they come to singing at 15, 16, 17 years old. So we don't have, some singers don't have musical skills that they developed from 5 years old or 6 years old. But I think piano is very important. I think harmony is very important. I think being able to sight sing is very important. The ear can be trained. It can be trained. And I don't know about this school, but I know when I studied in Canada or in Holland that oftentimes the teachers would just push the singers through the program. They would just, through the ear training classes or through the harmony classes, they just let them go through because they thought they're a lost cause. And we are not a lost cause. We can do this, you know, but that we have to be really disciplined and vigilant because, you know, like I say, sometimes you cannot tell what the conductor is doing. I mean, sometimes I cannot tell what a conductor is doing. Sometimes the conductor doesn't know what they're doing. And you need to have such a strong sense of hearing and musicianship that you can stick to the piece that you're singing no matter what. You know, or you think you're going to get your cues from another singer? What if they screw up? What if they're 2 bars early and you were supposed to get your note from them? You know, so understanding the harmony of the piece, it's unlikely the entire orchestra will be wrong. So know the orchestral part. Know where your cue is from the orchestra who has the music in front of them, instead of counting on the tenor. Yeah, I mean, you know, also, of course, with Equilibrium, I was looking for a very high level of dedication and musicianship. And I think more and more singers this is demanded of us. It's just not acceptable anymore. It's like what I said about having a coach teach you your music. No, because it also, psychologically, it affects you because you go into rehearsal and you feel like the weakest musician in the room, and you may very well be. You know, if you didn't learn that music yourself, if somebody drilled it into you, but if you learned it yourself, it's in you, right? And that gives you strength, and that gives you confidence, and then we could get into the whole psychological issue of singers as divas. I mean, half the reason singers behave like divas is because they're scared and insecure. And so when you eliminate some of the reasons for insecurity, then your ego has a completely different relationship to your singing, and you can have a different kind of collaborative interaction with your musical partners. Yes?
Hang on, Madeleine, you will get a microphone.
We
there.
get a microphone.
You said that when you were young, you gave first performance of contemporary music. And I would like to know, how do you look at this now for the relation to contemporary music in the education for singers? Is it important for you? Or for singers? What do you think about to be, not to have so much fear maybe? Contemporary music could also...
Well, I think it's a balance, because I think you have to be true to the repertoire that you're drawn to, but you also have to force yourself to be curious and take risks. So I'm drawn to contemporary music. I mean, I am passionate about it. And I looked around me, you know, when I was a student, and I thought, not very many of my colleagues feel like this, you know. And that was fine. They had the music that they really wanted to sing, and I had the music that I really wanted to sing. On the other hand, without composers, we are nothing. And if we do not give composers the opportunity to hear their music performed, and if we shut them out, then we're killing music. You know, it's going to stop. We need composers. And I think some people will have a stronger relationship to contemporary music in their life and career. And other singers will sing contemporary music that suits them. For example, there's this wonderful alto named Sara Mingardo. And we sang in a crazy opera together at La Fenice. And the composer really wrote each of our parts for each of us. And my part was crazy virtuoso. And Sara's part was just, it was like a Handelian aria. I was so jealous, but I could never have sung that like her. But it was smart, because she said, okay, I'll do it, but I'm going to take this risk, but you got to protect me a little bit. And I thought that was a really good collaboration, you know, collaborative way of working. Very Italian, perhaps. So, yeah, I think there's an obligation. I think a lot of singers, when they're in conservatory, they're not learning the meat and potatoes of the contemporary repertoire. They're singing student composer works. And it's absolutely good to sing the works of student composers, but you also must sing the major works of the 20th century. Because if you don't, and the composers must study the entire history of music, of course, but also understand that they don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you want to use extended vocal techniques, etc., sounds, don't invent your whole, as a composer, do not invent a school of symbols. Look at Berio Sequenza 3, Ligeti Aventure Nouvelle Aventure, and Stockhausen scores. And then you will understand what symbols you need to use for what actions, and then it's done. And you don't have to reinvent a whole new school of symbols, which many composers do. Drives me crazy. And learn the International Phonetic Alphabet, because the International Phonetic Alphabet is called international because everybody can use it. And if you, and so it's very helpful because singers, this is part of the way we understand music. We know these symbols, so we know what vowel to make. Yeah, I feel that there's a kind of marriage counseling that needs to go on between performers and composers, especially singers and composers. And again, back to this nonviolent dialogue. Like, for example, in this opera that I was doing right now with Michel Jarel, he had written, in this crazy scene I have with Boscovas, he wanted me to be forte in a very fast passage that was like an F above middle C. And forte. For me, an F above middle C is no man's land. I can't do anything with that. And it was going on for like 10 minutes. And I thought, I'm going to wreck my voice. And I was, of course, I felt angry. How could you do this to me? How could you write this for me? But it was just simple ignorance, which is fine. It wasn't personal. And so I didn't say to him, how could you write this for me? Because I'm experienced and old. And so I said to Michael, if you want it to sound like this, then we should keep it here, but I don't think I can get a fortissimo sound. If you move up a sixth, and I made very, very specific suggestions. I didn't just say, this is shit, it doesn't work. I was very specific. I said, set me on an E flat in Passaggio and keep dropping down. You know, keep that as the central note instead of an F above middle C. Set me there and drop down and up from there. Then I can really bounce. Then I can resonate. I can keep focusing on this one note. And he rewrote everything, you know. And it was a ton of work for him. It was a ton of work for me. But we ended up with a section that we could live with. You know, we could survive. And that kind of collaboration I find very rewarding. And I think that can only happen when there's a trust. And in my case, it's from all those years of experience, and composers know that I'm on their side, you know, which I think, you know, I've seen so many rehearsals where the orchestra are not nice enough to the composer. And it bothers me a lot. And so I have little ways of trying to influence the orchestra. And one thing I did with the Hans Abrahamson piece called Let Me Tell You, which I love so much, was that I actually premiered it in Berlin. And it was with Andres Nelson's conducting. And it was quite difficult, and rhythmically very difficult. Lots of ratios, very Rolf Schock. And so I thought, okay, the orchestra, normally the singer doesn't come in until like the second last rehearsal, and that's how Andres had planned the rehearsals. And I'd never worked with Andres before. I'd asked him to do the premiere of this piece, but I'd never worked with him before. So first of all, I had to get him to change the rehearsals. I made him split up 2 of the rehearsals and add an extra rehearsal, because they know that an orchestra, when they sleep on a piece, even just sleeping on it, having a shorter rehearsal and sleeping on something, you retain more information. So I had to get the conductor of the Berlin Phil to change the rehearsal order, and then I said, I want to come to the first rehearsal. And they never want the soloist at the first rehearsal. And I said, no, I have to be there because I need to convince them. And he's like, I said, trust me. So I memorized my part for the first rehearsal. Well, we only had 3, so I had to have it memorized. But I memorized it for the first rehearsal. And scared as I was, I put the music on the music stand, I closed the score, I faced the orchestra, and we all went through the piece for the first time with me facing them. And the reason I did that was because I'd sung with this group before, and I like them very much, and I know they're really competitive. And I thought, when they see the blonde soprano standing there facing them, who's memorized her part, they are going to get competitive, and they're going to try and do as well as I am. Instead of saying, music is too difficult, they were like, and it was really a tactic. And it was fun, you know, to bring them on side for this piece, and it worked. And so then every time I did the piece, I tried to encourage the conductor to let me come to the first rehearsal. Not only because whether the orchestra was like competitive like Berlin or not, but also because then they could feel, they could start to share my sound. Because the character of the sound that I was making in the piece, they needed to incorporate as well. And so when I was there from the first rehearsal, I knew that we'd just go straight in to them, and then they would know what they had to do. Whereas you show up at the end, and they're just sitting with these scores with no soloist, and they don't know how to be touched, so.
We have time for one last question with a not extremely long answer.
Yeah, my answers are so long.
No, I'm just being the clock.
Oh.
Hello. When you chose Sophie Asplund after the audition, what were you looking for?
Oh, I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew what she offered was something that I liked.
Okay.
And is that Emma? Yeah, it's interesting because we have another singer here. This is a cool story too, because Emma auditioned, but I'm going to go back to, so I will answer your question, and I'll keep it short. But Emma auditioned also for Baba the Turk, and she did a super audition, and I gave her the part. And then she called me up, and she said, I got another gig, and it's better. And I was like, what? And she told me what she got. It was Carmen, and it was a whole bunch of performances, and Baba was only going to be like 3. I said, Emma, take Carmen. We'll work together another time. But I really liked that we could have that dialogue. It wasn't just her agent telling me she was pulling out, but it was literally a dialogue where I was like, it's a no-brainer. Do the Carmen. It's a dream role for you. Baba will come later, which was super nice. But anyway, in Sophie's case, I mean, at the auditions, I didn't really know exactly what I was looking for. It's funny because Jackie Reardon, the Olympic coach I spoke about, she and I had, she came to some of the auditions. And she was looking for what she called the shimmer quality. And that's what I was looking for too, because there are a lot of sopranos that can sing Anne Truelove's aria. So how do you differentiate, you know? And there was a shimmering quality, or there was an originality, or there was a choice of attitude. I liked that Sophie was kind of serious and a tiny bit, not angry, but she had a bit of an edge, which I liked a lot. Her choices, her dramatic choices were very strong and intriguing to me, and I thought, I want to know more. So when I'm choosing people, I mean, and sometimes I couldn't take all the people. I was in an embarrassment of riches, you know, I couldn't take everybody I wanted. And yet, it was that special shimmer. Yeah. That's a good way to end.
It was a fantastic way to end,
Yeah.
yes. Thank you all for coming, and this was the first half of this wonderful day together with you. But we will now feed her and make sure that she gets some rest. And you're welcome back for the afternoon session, where 4 happy students will sing in a masterclass together with Barbara.
Great.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
now.
Thank you.